Tuesday, SBC recorded an interview given by the Prime Minister, Mr. Kuan Yew, to 5 foreign correspondents. We bring you now the program.
On behalf of our panel, I would like to welcome the Prime Minister of Singapore, Mr. Kuan Yew. My name is Michael Richardson of the Age newspaper in Melbourne and the Sydney Morning Herald. With me in the studio tonight to interview the Prime Minister are 4 other foreign correspondents.
I'm Ken Whiting of the Associated Press.
I'm Hans Heine with the German radio network ARD NDR.
My name's Chris Sherwell. I'm from the Financial Times of London.
I'm Masaru Matsuda for the Nihon Keizai Shimbun, Japan.
Singapore has just finished celebrating 25 years of nation building. Political power is being transferred from older to younger leaders. We would like to start our questions tonight with one that interests many Singaporeans and many people in Singapore, the date of the general elections widely expected for later this year. Prime Minister, have you decided on a date for those elections? When will you announce it? And will you be unhappy if the polls do not result in another clean sweep for the ruling People's Action Party?
I have not settled the date. I have a tentative date, but I'm watching to see how the American economy goes. If all goes well, as it looks like, it will be held in the next 4 or 5 months before Chinese New Year.
Will you be unhappy if the polls don't result in another clean sweep for the PAP?
We fight to win. At the same time, that tells us something when we don't win, as we did not in Anson. So happiness is a subjective frame of mind. This is a test, and out of the test we gain useful feedback and information, like the way they voted the last time in Radin Mas and in Teluk Blangah, where we did not have strong candidates, but they were strong, favorable constituencies. It signaled to us a changing electorate, a younger, more intelligent, more educated, more demanding electorate, not interested in our having a balanced slate of Chinese, Indians, Malays. They're just saying, look, this man you're putting is going to be my MP. I don't think he measures up. I'm not voting for him. So the way the voting goes tells us something. And it could well be, as in the case of Anson, the way the voting went, we gained something. So being unhappy at the result of Anson didn't mean we lost by it.
Prime Minister, much publicity has been given recently to the naming of your son as a candidate for Parliament. Are you pleased to see him enter politics, and would you like to see him become Prime Minister one day?
It's been on my mind for many years. He has the attributes. He also has the disadvantage of being my son, because it will always be said that he was favored, and he'll always be measured against his father. I think he ought to be big enough to be measured in his own right. I was pleased that the younger ministers decided to nominate him, because it showed they did not lack self-confidence. He was so obvious a choice that not to have chosen him would have told me something about the younger ministers. Perhaps they did not want to embarrass me. Perhaps they also felt more comfortable without younger, bright, strong young men, but that they chose him proved to me that they were not afraid of competition, that they were out to incorporate the best in the team, and that pleased me. Whether he'll make it, first he's got to win the elections, then he's got to prove that he's equal to the job, first of being a minister. Whether he'll be prime minister, that's not up to me. He's got to convince the other MPs, because the prime minister must command the confidence of the majority of the members of parliament. And he's got some 3 strong men, older than him, with more experience and already entrenched. He'll find his level.
Prime Minister, you're not at all worried, are you, following up this question, about whether your son's entry into politics inevitably raises the question of whether you're really satisfied with the second generation leadership, which is now, after all, very well established, and on top of this, that it runs the risk that you could be accused of trying to create a dynasty. Do these suggestions worry you at all?
Not really. My methods of running the government, my measurements for getting people to be ministers, to be tested for leadership, they're well known. I don't think it's a slight on the other ministers that they chose to field my son. I think it is a tribute to their objectivity and their willingness to incorporate the best, even if it is or could be a challenge to them. As for forming a dynasty, well, I don't need to seek fulfillment vicariously. I've reached a point in life where, if given a choice, I'd like my accounts to be closed with me and the judgment made on what I have done. But his entry into politics, my son's entry into politics, means a new chapter, not connected with me, but not altogether unconnected, because it could be said that I influenced his thinking, the cost or shape of his political philosophy. And so his account may reflect either creditably or discreditably on me. So, well, there's something I live with too as a father. No, it doesn't bother me.
Mr. Prime Minister, would you eventually consider elections for a president in case the constitution would be amended accordingly?
I would not rule it out, but I would not make a firm commitment that that is a job that I will undertake. 4 years, 5 years is a long time, and I would imagine that to run the job in will take several years, because a new relationship has to be created. The amendments will have to be done after the next elections, or should be carefully thought out. The officials are thinking through all the problems. The Auditor General, the Accountant General have to work out who has to inform the President's committee or secretariat what assets are being committed or what debts are being incurred. And we don't want to upset the present executive powers of the Prime Minister. It is only when he encroaches on reserves that he's got to get the President's concurrence. That means sensible, practical relations so that the system can continue as it is. I would like to be Prime Minister whilst that system is first implemented, so I can tell the President, who I hope will be someone who knows me and will know that I'm not raiding the reserves to squander it, that these guidelines will have to be interpreted sensibly. Then after such a period, well, he'll have to serve out his term, which I think should be more than the term of the Prime Minister and his cabinet, more than one parliamentary term, so that they do not coincide. That there will be a sitting president in the middle of his office when the Prime Minister and his cabinet has resigned and is re-elected.
Prime Minister, do you foresee the development of a two-party parliamentary system in Singapore? Do you think that would be desirable, or would you prefer to see debate and dissent generated within and channeled through the ruling PAP and its grassroots organizations?
The way to bring it about, if it were wise to do so, would be to have the People's Action Party divide into two wings. Then both wings are committed to certain basic and fundamental rocks on which the society will rest, and can argue about peripherals, whether more should not be spent for social security, or more liberal view taken of liberal with a big L, of how we spend our money in tempering the harshness of meritocracy and open competition, whether we don't give a little more padding to those who can't quite make it to the middle ranges of our income brackets. That's theoretically ideal. Then you can switch sides and the electorate feels, well, all right, we've got to change, without prejudicing the whole system. In practice, it's extremely bold, radical, and I don't suppose I will do it, because it's not wise to ask a segment of the party, say, look, you go form the opposition, you're out of office. I don't know if my successors will. I think it's an unnecessary hazard, because there are enough schisms in the society as it is. It's not something you can cement over. Differences of race, Chinese, Malays, Indians, and different kinds of Chinese and different kinds of Indians and different kinds of Malays. And they are real, they are abiding, and we have done a lot to make it more uniform or less stark, the contrast, but if you are discerning, and you can go to a housing estate, they all look the same, but you can see that they lead slightly different lives. You would find in every estate now, major estate, a Malay mosque. And the amount of, not just religious, but social activity that revolves around the mosque, because it has libraries and reading rooms and so on, is quite remarkable. It's something which we have debated often amongst ourselves with our own Malay MPs. Is it wise to have all these extra facilities in the mosque? Because it means that the Malays detach themselves from the community center and make the mosque their own special community center. And you have more segregation, and either they want or the non-Malays want. I'll give a simple illustration to show up the difficulties. We used to have certain constituencies where the Malays were the majority of the voters. Now, we faced a fundamental problem when we resettled them. Do we rebuild these areas and rehouse Malays in these areas so that they will still be the majority? Or do we expose them and, like the Chinese and Indians, ballot for their neighbors? The Malay MPs thought it over, so did we. We decided, no, in the long term, it's better that we mix everybody up. So we have. No constituency has more than 30% Malays. That's the ceiling. The result will progressively be, or already I suspect is, a tremendous pressure on us to find Malay candidates who can fight against a Chinese candidate or an Indian candidate who's better qualified, more education, more energy, more whatever, and still win. That's quite a problem. Because the electorate has changed, and the young electorate no longer is interested about a party having a balanced slate. They've never faced riotous situations where people run amok and butcher, kill, maim each other because they're berserk. That's a new situation. So with these kind of deep underlying, almost primeval urges, I don't really see Whig, Tory, kind of tossing power back and forth.
Prime Minister, the Singapore economy is expected to grow by about 9% in real terms this year, helped somewhat by the recovery in the United States, of course, and also by the domestic public sector construction effort in particular. But there also seems to me to be some gloom about the prospects in the property market. Retailing sector is quite depressed. Some of the country's blue-chip companies, including some government-controlled ones, are reporting disappointing results. And even some bankers are saying that times are getting harder. I'd like to ask you what you see as the main domestic engine of economic growth for Singapore over the rest of the decade.
Well, that depends on how the United States recovery goes. If it is sustained and you have 3% or 3.5% next year, or even 2.5% next year, and continues in that steady fashion, and the Europeans pick up and the Japanese provide more of the lift, I think we will gradually shift into higher value-added industries. They call it high-tech, but it's really just servicing high-tech industries. Computer software, computer peripherals, the manufacture of computer parts. But still very much what it is, the spread between manufacturing and servicing. But by the next decade, if the trend continues, then with the information age, we should be moving more into servicing, which will make me a lot more comfortable. We haven't got a large population, and we would be maximizing on our small population base by having them more and more in servicing, financial servicing, banks, insurance companies, credit cards, telecommunications, information generally. I think as fiber optics and all this data banks spread around the world, and everybody has his own personal computer, and you can switch your set on and link up with databases in America and Europe, Japan. Well, we should become more and more a regional information center. In the information age, we have a clear advantage because we have always concentrated on communications. We have good lines already established worldwide and regionally, and it's not subject to protectionist measures. So it's a great deal more comfortable than what it is now, because it means worrying about what happens with the GSP in the United States as it extended another 8.5 years, and are we disqualified? If so, when we reach $9,000 per capita? Is it fair to us, that measurement, and so on?
Prime Minister, can Singapore remain an open and internationally competitive economy with such a strong dollar and high wage and other costs? I think that certainly Australian businessmen here have some doubts on that score, and I believe that other business groups in Singapore do as well.
No, I don't think you're right. I think the Australians are worried because they take their Australian experience with them when they interpret these happenings in Singapore. A strong dollar is not too strong. It's weaker than the US dollar. It's always lagging behind. I think it's 2.16 to the US dollar. It used to be nearly $2. High wages, I don't really think they're high. We settled last year for the NWC, National Wages Council. Recommendation was, it was between 3.5% to 7% range. And the overall settlement across the board was 11.5%, over and above the top. So 4% above the top. This year the settlement was $27 plus 4 to 8%. And up till end September, about 15 to 20% settled above that range. These are open settlements between managements and workers and unions. Slightly over 50% settled at the top end of the range, 6 to 8%. And the rest settled in the middle ranges, almost a small minority of about less than 10% settled at the lower ends of the range, shipbuilding, the ones not doing well. So there's no evidence that this is so, and it's very manifest when you look at the labor figures. Jobs created this year, second quarter, increase by 5% over the first quarter, and I think about 3-4% over the same quarter last year. Jobs lost, retrenchment. Jobs created was about 6,000. Jobs lost about 1,000. And 6,000 has taken into account the jobs lost 1,000. So 6,000 over and above the 1,000. Unemployment figures went down, I think, by a few hundreds, from about 7,000 to 6,004, 6,003. So the signals that we get from the market, demand for labor, jobs that are going, settlement of wage rates show that we are competitive. That is not so. And indeed, the Americans, American Business Council, they put up a submission in August. They're all members of the National Productivity Council, asking the EDB, our Economic Development Board, not to canvass or recruit any more new companies, because they say, look, you haven't got the workers. We need workers to expand. This is a year of recovery. And if you bring in more companies who call themselves high-tech, but in fact are doing simple assembly jobs of computer peripherals and very simple computer programming, you're just competing in the labor market. So there are very different signals. I think the Australian tends to interpret high wage rates as what's happened in Australia, where high wage rates are not matched by increased productivity and competitiveness in selling his products, and therefore every time he sees a wage rise of 11%, his heart is in his mouth. But where our productivity is going up by 7-8%, last year it was about 6, this year maybe 7, and we are competitive, I think it's wiser to move the wages nearer what the market can easily carry than keep it down and have an explosion 2-3 years down the road, and then you upset the whole stable relationship between employer, management, and government. We've got confidence between employers, management, and unions, and the government. The figures are there. We can study it every year, reach broad agreement on what is feasible, and we allow a bigger and bigger range for employers to decide with their workers at which end of the range they ought to be.
Prime Minister, you just mentioned so-called high-tech companies, which are not really high-tech.
They are not.
Are coming into Singapore. Then could I ask, what does high-tech mean to Singapore? Does Singapore really have a high-tech future?
Well, we've started this Kent Ridge estate, and there are a few that's supposed to link up with the university doing biotechnology research. A few of our Singaporeans have gone abroad to Canada and Australia, Canada and America, have come back to help us set these units. They're doing research in America and in Canada. And they tell us that in certain peripheral areas, there is a chance we can make a breakthrough. And I must not discourage our enthusiasts in the Economic Development Board and in the science and engineering faculties. I think sheer mass of brain power, numbers, and quality, you face a population of 250 million, the whole of North America, extremely bright, particularly in the areas that they have chosen for themselves, electronics, communications, computers, biotechnology. Maybe the Japanese have given them some competition in computers. They haven't yet in biotechnology. So really what we can hope to do is to keep abreast with what they are doing and perhaps service them at the peripherals or little niches which are left open. If the Europeans can't muscle in on computers, I don't see how we can.
Prime Minister, I'd like to turn to the banking sector, if I may.
Yeah.
There have been 3 major pieces of legislation already this year, toughening the considerable powers of the monetary authority still further. And in the past year or so, we've seen a finance company closed down, several bullion and commodity dealers closed down, and only recently a merchant bank. At the same time, some commercial banks have been ordered to make large debt provisions, and the overall impression is that the government seems to be battening down the hatches at the very time that New York, London, Tokyo, Sydney are apparently opening doors and liberalizing.
No,
Shouldn't Singapore be doing the same thing?
I'm not sure first that that's what New York, London, Bonn, or Frankfurt, or Tokyo is doing. I think that's what New York appears to be doing. They're not making debt provisions for what their bankers must know are very, very long-term loans of sometimes 200% the capitalization value. So they got to keep this they got to keep the road show going on the road and reschedule. But I believe the Germans and the Japanese do make substantial provisions for reserves. I think the British too are conservative. So the analysis of the people outside the collective cartel that has to keep on lending is that there will be a divergence of interests in a few years, because those banks, like Germans, Japanese, maybe British, who have made substantial provisions for these loans, troublesome loans, will be less willing to risk fresh funds. Indeed, the Basel Concordat has an offshoot called the Cook Committee, where bank regulators and supervisors meet and discuss what should be done. And the MAS representative attends these meetings, and the last one in Rome, I read the report, urging stricter supervision and urging banks, the big multinationals, big money banks, not to set up branches where supervision is lacking or inadequate. They are recommending that no subsidiaries or branches should be set up in centers which are not adequately supervised. In other words, they're signaling to us, supervise. And we've had no complaints from any head office. I don't know about the people on the spot. You know about the branches in Lugano where they went trading on the foreign exchange market without notice, and vast sums of money were lost. But I believe that not only have we taken measures which are necessary, we have taken them in time before irretrievable damage has been done to the system. And fortunately, I think no single bank, or indeed finance company, has been unable to meet the provisions, the new provisions required. I think there are higher liquidity and reserve requirements, limits on lending to any single borrower or group of borrowers, limits on investments, investment limits on real estate, and so on. The only adjustment time we had to concede was from 1 year to 2 years for those who had lent 60% of their capital assets to one borrower or a group of borrowers to get down to 30%. We are giving them 2 years instead of 1 year. They have asked for 2 years. And what is interesting is no bank, either local, Singaporean, or foreign-owned, made any representations to the MAS or to the Minister of Finance during the period between first reading and second reading. So nobody thought that they were wrong in principle. Whatever they may have desired privately, nobody came out and said, look, these provisions are wrong, they will stifle the growth of the banking industry and so on. In fact, they all know that this is wise. If we don't do that, we will have the sort of problems which has plagued Hong Kong. Last year, September '83, one Hang Lung Bank had to be taken over by the government, nationalized, rescued. And then there was a deposit-taking company that went bankrupt, couldn't meet its liabilities. I don't think we want to wait for that situation to develop.
You're not concerned at all that the image will be gained that there is the heavy hand of the government at work with the regulation, and that this might impair the chances of Singapore achieving its ambitions as an international financial centre?
I think that may have been the view of bankers previous to the debt crisis, when I was told by many bankers that it's much better to do business in Luxembourg than in Frankfurt, because they let us do what we like, and all this mollycoddling of so much in the reserves loses us so much opportunity costs. But the same bankers who said all those things have gotten into trouble with their Luxembourg branches, and the mood has changed, and I believe that the Basel Concordat, the Cook Committee, has really articulated their present mood, that banks which are not properly regulated, or whose branches are not properly regulated, set offshore, are in jeopardy, or in more jeopardy than if you are in a center which is properly regulated.
You alluded a moment ago to the international debt problem, and the aspect of that which has potentially the most severe implications for Singapore is in the Philippines. How has that problem affected Singapore exactly?
Well, banks, foreign and Singapore banks, but mainly foreign banks, have lent a total of 7 billion Singapore dollars. I suppose many of them are now meeting in New York to discuss how they're going collectively with other banks around the world, probably 1,500 banks, to raise $1.5 billion for the next year. So it's obviously not going to be, the capital is not going to be paid for quite some time, and like everybody else, we hope the interest will be paid. But for the Singapore banks, we have asked them to make provisions for the contingency which we hope will not arise. But it's already done, so we've got to live with the problems as they are.
Sir, recently there has been strong emphasis on defense in the media in Singapore as well as in speeches. Total defense, civil defense, every kind of defense. Might that lead to the conclusion that you foresee any threat to the security of Singapore, and if yes, what kind of threat would that be?
Well, our biggest threat in Singapore is that any threat will come from someone bigger than us. It must be in the nature of our situation, in the nature of our circumstances. And the greatest disservice we can do ourselves is to be terrified and panic-stricken. We have a national service defense force based on a civilian population. If the civilian population is faint-hearted and is intimidated as they see forces mobilizing, huge, massive forces, then the battle is lost before any shot is fired. So a younger generation is coming of age. My generation, we've faced Japanese occupation, conquest, hardships, brutalities. We've gone through quite a tumultuous period of human history. And we are accustomed to staking our lives. The younger generation now in their 30s have had relatively quiet and placid a life. Well, life has meant growth over the last 15 years. A few hiccups in 1973-74 oil crisis, 1979 second oil crisis, so growth rates went down, but on the whole every year meant a better life. I think they've got to face up to the very real possibility that one day somebody is going to take their knuckles, put knuckle dusters on and say, you give me oils. And I think Singaporeans will just have to take a deep breath and say, well, or else let's see what we can do. And civil defense, total defense, is to involve the civilian population whose morale, fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, affects the morale of sons, brothers. And that, I'm not sure whether we will succeed in this way, but at least theoretically, intellectually, we have posed the problem to them. That whatever the threat is going to be bigger than us. So let's live with that. And let's not get terrified.
Prime Minister, do you foresee increasing threats in the years ahead to ASEAN member countries? What kinds of threats do you see coming up, and should they be met collectively as well as individually?
I think we ought to wait and see how the Cambodian issue is resolved, because that will decide the balance of forces between the communist group of countries and a non-communist group of countries. If it is resolved with a total Vietnamese withdrawal and the reinstallation of a Cambodian government not beholden to either Vietnam or to China or to the Soviet Union, then I can foresee a period of relative stability in which the non-communist groups can together withstand the pressures of the communist group of countries. If it is resolved unfavorably in that there is a clear benefit to use arms supplied by the Soviet Union to extend one's territory, then enormous problems arise. Because in expectation of such further moves, shifts will be made in national positions. So ASEAN is agreed that there should be a withdrawal and there should be elections to decide who is to govern Cambodia. In other words, that there should be no benefit to anyone by exploiting an alliance with a superpower and supplies of arms and military aid from that superpower to expand one's territory. Of course, there are very strong desires on the part of several ASEAN countries not to want to weaken Vietnam, because they see a useful role for Vietnam in this balancing between communist powers. And it's a viewpoint which we take seriously. I think there is merit in that viewpoint. But there must be a withdrawal.
Prime Minister, in connection with the Cambodian issue, after Australia's inconclusive effort, do you think can Japan be a useful mediator between ASEAN and Hanoi in resolving the issue?
If you ask my personal opinion, I'd say yes, because Japan has got more to give Vietnam than Australia. And Vietnamese are not slow-witted. But if you ask me what are the chances of a successful mediation in the immediate future, I'd say not very much, because the Vietnamese are not yet ready. They have thrown the dice. They had this treaty of friendship and cooperation. They had the arms, and they thought one swift sweep into Cambodia and it's all over. Well, they're wrong. It's not over. They are landed with an intractable problem, but they are very old men who have gone through many crises and have not yielded lightly. They're all in their 70s. The first three leaders in Vietnam, they're unlikely to admit that they're wrong very quickly. And we'll have to wait and be patient.
Prime Minister, do you think the Vietnamese can possibly do a deal over Kampuchea with the Kampuchean resistance and thus with the ASEAN countries without being sure at the same time that the Khmer Rouge will not return, and thus without, unless there's a deal with China simultaneously?
The terms for a settlement which have been agreed upon in the United Nations does offer all of us such a solution. I'm not saying that it is going to be the ideal that the Vietnamese want. They want a solution which takes the status quo as it is and a withdrawal as and when they think is necessary, 5 to 10 years after peace and the dismantling of all the resistance forces. The Chinese have their views as to what should be a good settlement, but in between those two extreme viewpoints, there's a large body of opinion in the United Nations that believes the Cambodian people should be allowed to decide their future. And a situation could be created in which reluctantly both the Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Soviet Union, I suppose, will think it is worthwhile letting the Cambodian people decide. And if the Cambodian people decide, I don't see how Pol Pot will come back.
Prime Minister, the United States says that continued unhampered access for its forces to military facilities in the Philippines and the maintenance of regional security arrangements, including the ANZUS Treaty between the United States, Australia and New Zealand, are essential. Do you think that a satisfactory balance of power in Southeast Asia can be maintained without a substantial US presence which is underpinned by these arrangements?
No. The United States presence is the only counterweight to a Soviet presence. If there is no American presence in East and Southeast Asia, well, we have a very different world.
Do you see a danger from the developments in the Philippines, the gains apparently being made by the insurgents and political uncertainties there, that access that the United States says is essential may be restricted or even denied in future?
That the United States administration has decided, has seen fit to have a senior official, I think Mr. Armitage, express his fears over the growth of the NPA, New People's Army, and the communists in the Philippines, and openly discuss the possibility of a communist takeover within 10 years is, I think, significant and worrisome. They must have reasons. I mean, they are thinking people. They are not alarmists. By the time they sound this alarm, the situation must be grave enough for the alarm to have been sounded. And I think it will have grave repercussions on the whole region.
Prime Minister, based on current trends, what kind of nation do you imagine Singapore is likely to be when it celebrates 35 years of nation building 10 years from now?
Given peace, no major world recession or depression, growth rates of, say, 4 to 8%. By 10 years, we would have been graduated for GSP reasons. I think we have to accept that. More in the service sector. We should be a growing information center, or a part of the information age network of centers in the world. Standard of living which should be able to sustain reasonable cultural levels, reasonable cultural activities. I think our major acute problems of want, privation, bad housing, malnutrition, that's already over. The subacute ones of inadequate care for the old and the aged, inadequate institutional care, because more and more families find it very irksome to look after their old because their wives are working, or wives are working, and not enough free hands in the household. Well, that could improve. On the whole, I'd say a more gracious, a less pressured society. It should have already arrived. It shouldn't be anxious about whether it's going to arrive or not. We should by then have established our educational system and got everybody educated who can be educated, and establish it so well that for the next 10, 15 years people will keep on being educated. Now, there should be no fallback.
Prime Minister, Singapore's great economic achievements, I think, have rightly won great acclaim abroad. One of the criticisms I've heard most often made of Singapore, of the education system, and perhaps more widely of the media or the cultural environment, is that in some sense it doesn't put enough emphasis on independent critical thought, that the government errs, if you like, in favor of control. Looking ahead to the future, as you've been doing, is that your intention for the future as well, or And do you feel that it creates the best climate in which future leaders, your successors, can cope with the unexpected?
First, let me divide your statement, because I think there are two different things. One, that our educational system does not allow more independent thinking, more creativity, and therefore more scientists, more discoverers of the great undiscovered frontiers of knowledge and science. I do not think that is just a question of system of education. I think it has to do with culture, with norms, standard behavior of students and teachers. The Japanese face the same criticism, and they want more creative innovators. And they are saddled with the same criticisms, that they lack this questioning, this debate, this ruthless pursuit of truth, even at the expense of the dignity of one's teachers. I think we are all products of our own culture, and Oriental culture requires students to be polite, not to be obstreperous. I mean, if you know so much, and you shouldn't be in class, you should be running your own class. At the same time, because we've had so many foreign teachers, some in our schools, definitely in our universities, and many of our teachers themselves having been abroad, educated, there is more give and take than, say, a typically Chinese language school in the 1950s or 1960s. But I'm reconciled to accepting a more polite classroom situation. I think that's part of Oriental culture, and we can't change that. The media, on the other hand, is totally different. I mean, that's just a particular character trait, or a particular, not just character, it's also culture, because if you read Indian newspapers as I do in Delhi, I mean, there's such a plethora of views, you're confused. I mean, I think the East Asian is different from the South Asian. The South Asian is the